Good evening. I'd like to call the June 4th meeting of the University Heights City Council to order. It's June 4, 2018. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Rock?
Here.
Mr. Wiseman?
Here.
Mr. Sims? Mrs. Pardee?
Here.
Mr. Ertl?
Here.
Mrs. Cameron? Mrs. Weiss?
Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Sims and Mrs. Cameron?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Pardee, a second by Mr. Wiseman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the vote.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. Mr. Sims, Mrs. Cameron are excused. All who are able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now is the portion of the meeting where we accept comments from the audience. Speakers are traditionally limited to 5 minutes with a total time not to exceed 15 per meeting. We typically relax that in the public interest. Is there anybody who would care to address the city this evening? You're on the regular agenda, so we'll get to you. Okay. Well, if there is no one, then we will proceed first or next with, excuse me? Oh yes, we have minutes. Excuse me. We do have minutes from the May 22nd, 2018 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review them?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right, we'll hold on a moment for Mr. Rock, but we have a motion to accept by Mrs. Pardee and seconded by Mr. Ertl.
On page 4 of 6, second paragraph down, last line of the second paragraph, there's like 5 dashes or a word should appear. I don't know, maybe the word wasn't made out on the recording. And I don't know what that word should be, but right here.
Okay, I'll check.
Yeah, maybe just re-listen to that. And then on page 6 of 6, under safety committee, that should read, Mr. Rock stated that the committee met. That's it.
Okay, Mrs. Pardee, would you amend your motion to indicate the changes identified by Mr. Rock?
Yes.
And do you still second, Mr. Ertl?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other changes? Okay, so Mrs. Thomas, we call the vote on the motion to accept the minutes as amended.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? I'm sorry, Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Reports and communications from the mayor and taking of action. Okay, since our last meeting on May 23rd, I built a rain barrel at the Rain Barrel Workshop sponsored by the Cuyahoga County Soil and Water Conservation District. Patrick Rogan-Myers will fill you in on more details regarding that workshop, but we did have a lot of people both from within University Heights and from surrounding communities here to build rain barrels and learn about the history of the sponsoring organization. On Thursday, May 24th, I participated in the Sing Out, a fundraiser for the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. A number of office holders, prominent citizens, and local celebrities sang at Severance Hall while presenters went over the mission and the successes to date of the center. The fundraising goal was $500,000, and I'm happy to report that we reached that goal. Judge KJ Montgomery personally recruited me to participate. It was very rewarding, and I met a lot of people, not only in the chorus, but at the event, and also in the general community, including city residents who were heartened to see our city being represented in this cause. On Friday, May 25th, I attended the Hike for Hunger rally at Jesu. The Jesu students raised an average of $300 each in sponsorships for their hike. Proceeds went to Meals on Wheels, local soup kitchens, and the food bank. The Jesuit educational objective of men and women for others was strongly evident. In addressing the Jesu student body, I commended Father Carl Kaiser and the administration and staff at Jesu for instilling this tradition in their students And most of all, I thanked and congratulated these growing young men and women for their service to the community. And I thank the JZoo community for allowing me the opportunity to participate and address the student body. On Memorial Day, it did not rain. No, the sun was out and it was hot. The parade was well attended both by participants and by residents, and far from a rain out, it was a success. I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank a few people who helped make it a success. Our Memorial Day committee, Pete Bernardo, Barbara Blankfeld, Harvey Blankfeld, Linda Bruff, Phil Ertl, Jane Evans, Robin Gersheimer, Wendy Gersheimer, Jerry Jacobson, Jeff Mueller, Mike Sears, and Sean Weiss. I'd like to thank Rabbi Feivel Katz of the University Heights Kollel, filling in for his father, Rabbi Yaakov Katz, who was stuck in Baltimore due to the weather, and Father Bernie McAniff, the Assistant Dean of Students at John Carroll University. I'd like to thank our interns, Elizabeth Price and Cameron Caputi, the University Heights Symphonic Band, our Service Director, Jeff Picorni, our Assistant Service Director, John Pacella, and the several city service employees who volunteered to work on a holiday to help make this parade possible. I'd like to thank Kate Malone, John Carroll University's Manager of Government and Community Relations, Major Timothy Jenkins, our keynote speaker. I'd like to thank our City Council for participating at multiple levels in making this parade a success. And most of all, I'd like to thank our Special Projects Coordinator, Lisa Marinick, who really brought it all together. Once again, the Memorial Day Parade was our city's signature event, and I hope we don't have to wait a full year to have another occasion to bring the community together in such a positive way. The rebranding efforts are underway. The steering committee met last Tuesday, May 29th, and the discovery session with invited stakeholders was conducted last Wednesday, May 30th. I've personally found the process inspirational, and I've thought a lot about who we are and who we want to be, but more on that another day. On Thursday, May 31st, I attended the Mayors and Managers meeting in Broadview Heights to discuss legislative matters in Columbus and to discuss residential real estate issues around the county. I'd like to thank the Acra-Canton Association of Realtors for hosting that meeting. Interim Finance Director Michael Frederick, Community Development Coordinator Patrick Rogan-Myers, and I attended the Turk meeting with the county to discuss tax issues in connection with the University Square TIF and to meet our reporting requirements. We are in good stead with the county on the reporting, though there is obviously still much to do with the site. The Mayors and Managers Group also had a meeting in Independence to discuss the several national opioid litigation cases all pending here in Cleveland as multi-district litigation. That meeting was attended by myself as well as our prosecutor, Michael Astrup. I met with our former EastCom partner cities to dissolve EastCom, as that entity is obsolete in light of the creation of the Heights Hillcrest Regional Dispatch. We agreed to split up some of the equipment, outdated though some of it may be. Cleveland Heights will take possession of the radio system, and in the event of an emergency with the Heights Hillcrest Dispatch region, that radio system will be made available to member cities if needed. I met with the Heights Hillcrest Communications Center Council of Governments to discuss the 2017 financials, audit, overall summary reports at the call center, the prospect of using 911 cellular in lieu of Ready Notify, which is the county emergency notification system, or Code Red, which is the system our city has previously contracted to use and to which we are moving on from. And as a Council of Governments, we agreed that we should move from quarterly to bi-monthly, that is every other month, meetings. And then I met with the City Council's Finance Committee, where we discussed the ongoing efforts to make this city auditable after having no reconciliations done by the city of the year 2017 during the year 2017. We have added 2 part-time people, one is a contract consultant, one is a part-time temp, to help our finance department write itself for last year and for this year. We also discuss the city budget, and with that, expenses related to IT and furniture needed for the city's new office space at 2245 Lawrenceville. And all of that was last Thursday. So Friday, I married people, returned calls, handled personnel matters, you know, the usual. And Sunday, I met with the Municipal Future Committee at the library. We began the preliminary discussions of the future of municipal facilities here in University Heights. Fundamentally, the questions are, what do we want and or need? Where will we put it? And how will we pay for it? The committee will be interested in touring the facilities, warts and all, to see what we have and don't have, and to hear from our several directors and chiefs as to what they see as our needs. Which brings us to today's agenda, food trucks and a grant proposal in Cedar Green, more on that soon. Tomorrow, in my capacity as Safety Director, I will be attending the Cuyahoga County Emergency Management Summit held by the Cuyahoga County Office of Emergency Management. Speakers include representatives of FEMA, Homeland Security, and the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. is the free seminar on backyard composting. That will be presented by the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District. That is tomorrow, June 5th at 7 p.m. here at City Hall. Beginning Monday, June 11th at 9 a.m., the city will be accepting applications for police officer. The notice, which includes qualifications and details for the exam, is available on the city's website. Next Thursday, June 14th, is the first concert in our city summer concert series. Kyle Primus and the K Street Band will entertain us with their soulful sounds covering classic Motown and contemporary R&B from the Four Tops to Bruno Mars. Their song list is at kstreetband.com, and so are some video clips. Beginning Tuesday, June 19th, Yoga in the Park resumes, and that's at Community Park from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. every Tuesday evening through August 15th. And finally, I do have this important announcement to make. Tom Belden, who has served on our city's Civil Service Commission since 1991, has moved out of the city. He informed me of this last week and has submitted his resignation, as residency in our city is a requirement for serving. I have thanked Mr. Belden for his decades of service to our city. Per the charter, the Civil Service Commission is comprised of 3 residents of the city who shall make necessary rules for the appointment, promotion, transfer, layoff, reinstatement, suspension, and removal of persons in the classified service. The Civil Service Commission meets upon demand. The commissioners serve 6-year terms, and each are to be staggered 2 years apart, so that every 2 years someone is either appointed new or reappointed to the commission. These appointments are to be confirmed by council, and notably, none of the current members have been resubmitted to council in many years, perhaps not since their initial appointments. Also, the seat that was occupied by Mr. Belden appears to be an even-year rotation, while the seats held by commission members Therese Sweeney-Drake and Keith Thomas appear to be in an odd-year rotation. And again, per the charter, these seats ought to be 2 years apart. And most unique to our charter, which is otherwise nonpartisan, the charter specifically states that no more than 2 members of the Civil Service Commission may be of the same political party, and the 2 that remain are both registered Democrats. At this time, we are seeking applicants for the vacant seat on the Civil Service Commission. That applicant should be a registered Republican, or at a minimum, not a registered Democrat. When I present this nominee to council, I intend to present the remaining 2 members for reappointment to their present seats for the balance of their terms, since this formality apparently has gone undone. We will also harmonize their term dates with the provisions of the charter so that we once again are appointing or reappointing someone every other year. As we are in the middle of exams and scores for our fire and police, and with exams for promotions due to be held, it would be my preference to have a nominee in short order as soon as we can identify the right person for the position. If you are a resident and are interested, or to you, the council, if you know someone who you would care to suggest, please have them send a statement of interest to me at mayor@universityheights.com. And remember that they cannot be a registered Democrat, as we have 2 Democrats on the commission already. This concludes my report. We now turn to the agenda, and the first item is a presentation by attorney Matt Yorkovich. Mr. Yorkovich, please, if you would come to the podium and identify yourself for the record and speak into the microphone for the benefit of the recording. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? I speak loud, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Well, we have a recording, though, which is why we want to make sure that you do use the microphone.
Well, I did bring some materials today. I covered this topic quite a bit, but in case anybody has questions, the materials might be useful. What I'll be talking today about is public nuisance under Ohio Revised Code 3767.41. One of the reasons it's relevant to this community is an action is in process in this community at 3886 Silsbee Road. If council's familiar with that project or that property was declared a nuisance by this council. Separate from that action, a private party, a neighbor of that property, brought a public nuisance action in common pleas court, having the court declare the property a nuisance, having the owner of the property enjoin to abate that nuisance. When that owner failed to abate the nuisance, the court appointed a receiver. That receiver took control of the property. That receiver, within a period of about 120 days, fully rehabbed the property, pulled all the required permits, brought the property back up to full compliance with the code, and actually has rented the property to tenants now. So that property has gone from public nuisance to a property that's back in beneficial use. Once we get the property through the sales process, it'll be back on the tax roll, producing tax for the, real estate tax for the community. But more importantly, we have a property that was an eyesore to the community. You can see there by the before and after photos that the property was in pretty deplorable condition. Received a lot of complaints from the neighbors, and now it's an occupied property, beautifully restored, and once its sale should garner a really nice value to the community and continue to increase the property values of the surrounding property. Why is this action a little bit unique? Well, this was one of the first actions we've brought in a first suburb. The majority of the actions I've brought over the past 10 years have been in the city of Cleveland, and they've been brought by nonprofit neighborhood community development corporations. And so this action being brought by a neighboring property owner to kind of stick up for its rights and its fellow neighbors' rights, to say, this property is a nuisance and I'm going to do something about it. I think it's pretty monumental. Also the fact that we have a property that's all of a sudden returned to productive use, that's occupied, and it's done so on private funds. So aside from the city having counsel and being party to the action, the funds to abate this public nuisance condition were expended by a private party. And with that, I am available for questions on this. Like I said, the action's brought under 3767.41, which is a civil public nuisance action. The city might be more familiar with criminal public nuisance actions or declarations of nuisance by municipality. This action's a little bit different in that it has jurisdiction over the property. Typically when criminal actions are brought, you can fine an individual, you can throw an individual in jail, but you really can't control the property under the criminal statute. This civil action allows the court to appoint a receiver to control the property, to secure the property, to make repairs to the property, things as simple as mow the grass or replace windows, paint the exterior of the structure. But also allows them, once they fully rehab the property, to put a tenant in place, collect rents on behalf of the property to defray those costs of abatement. And so it seems like a very novel action. These actions have been used since the 80s when the statute was created, most commonly in Cleveland Municipal Housing Court. So this is one of the first actions of its kind in common police court.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for our presenter?
Question.
Mrs. Weiss.
First of all, thank you so much for the documentation and the presentation. Just had a couple questions. One is, does the court bid out that receivership, or do they just have,
Yeah.
how do they choose which
Good
receiver?
Typically the receiver is the plaintiff. Normal bank sponsored receiverships, properties have an income flow that allows that property to kind of pay the cost of the receiver. 3767 is a little unique in that it's typically the plaintiff, the person bringing the action to declare a property a nuisance, that once all the interested parties, the owner, the mortgagees, anybody with an interest in the property, once they refuse or fail to abate the nuisance, then the court can appoint a receiver. I would say that we would love to find a lot of receivers that would be interested in this. But for instance, in this situation, the receiver expended about in excess of $70,000 out of pocket and won't recoup those funds until the property goes to sheriff's sale. So the present pool of typical foreclosure receivers really don't have an appetite to spend $70,000 of their own funds, only to wait to recoup those funds on a sale. So while it would be possible if there were a list of potential receivers, to offer that up to that list, it's generally unlikely. You really have to have a personal motivation in abating that nuisance condition.
So how did this property get this particular receiver?
Yeah, it was the neighbor who brought the action.
So the neighbor is actually the receiver?
Yeah, the
Oh,
neighbor's
I
actually the
remember
receiver.
that, okay.
And in, the majority of the cases, it's a nonprofit community development corporation that's bringing the action. And in those actions, they're prepared that if no one abates the nuisance, that they'll stand and serve as the receiver and expend the rehab costs, waiting to receive those back, at a sale. Or if a sale doesn't garner enough to cover the rehab costs, typically that receiver will take title to the property in satisfaction of any receiver's cost.
Okay, and is the court still going after the original owner in terms of back taxes and fines and things like that? Even though, I mean-
Those are separate actions. They are still liable, or would be still liable to the bank on any expenses or costs. But, this action doesn't really involve the taxes. But if the property sells at sheriff's sale for in excess of the receiver's costs, then the taxes will be the first priority outside of the receiver's lien. So there is a chance for the county to recoup those real estate taxes, depending on the distribution of proceeds of sale.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Yorkovich, I have a question, and part of it is, I understand it was a neighbor here, and you mentioned that a CDC could also step in to do this. What are the qualifications of a person, besides being willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars to do this?
Yeah.
What are the qualifications of a person who may step in to intervene and begin investing in a property that they don't actually own?
Yeah, that's great. So to get standing under 3767.41, the likely plaintiffs are a municipality, a tenant could bring an action, a neighbor within 500 feet, or a nonprofit community development corporation whose mission is to improve the housing conditions in its surrounding community. So as I said, typically they're nonprofit development corporations. Municipalities can also bring these actions. I know that the city of Columbus brings civil public nuisance actions quite frequently, but also a neighbor or a tenant. If there's a large apartment building, the tenants, we've brought actions before when the owner of the property has passed and left the property without gas in the wintertime. Some concerned tenants have stepped forward to bring actions. Municipalities have brought action. Interesting, a neighbor community of yours, Shaker, in partnership with Cleveland Restoration Society, has brought a civil nuisance abatement action over a historic property. But so a neighbor within 500 feet, a tenant, a municipality, or a nonprofit neighborhood development corporation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yorkovich, for coming in and for giving us the pictures. It's striking. I think didn't we talk about maybe demolishing this house when these pictures first came to light, and the prospect of the receivership came along, and I think the general feeling was like, well, okay, but we weren't really sure what was going to happen. But the house looks absolutely amazing. I'm so happy that it's actually a house now, and not just.
Yeah.
Sort of this pile. My main question is sort of who gets paid first when it goes to sheriff's sale?
Sure. The receiver, I think it's a brilliant thing about the statute. Banks aren't very fond of this part of the statute, but one of the greatest things about the statute is it allows the receiver's lien to be first priority. So the receiver's lien steps in front of the bank's mortgage and the judgment liens. And it really has a title clearing effect. If you've ever dealt with these vacant and abandoned properties, you find that you really can't find the owner. Maybe they've passed away, or they're at Las Vegas LLC that you can't get contact with, and you really can't get in touch with the bank. And so having that receiver's priority lien really gets everybody to the table and gets their attention. And then when the property is sold at sheriff's sale, the receiver is the first party that's paid. So their funds to abate that nuisance are paid back first. And then it would go the county taxes and then mortgages all the way down. And if there's enough money left over, even the owner would get some money back. I would tell you that It's unlikely that that distribution of proceeds works out that way. Typically, a receiver, gets the funds that the property goes for at sheriff's sale, or it chooses to bid its lien at sheriff's sale and take title to the property. So it depends on the market and the amount of the receiver's liens, but the receiver's lien is paid first.
And does the house have to be in foreclosure for you to start a receivership, or can it just be in any status?
Yeah, the 3767.41, it can be brought to enforce any municipal code. So any health, safety, fire code, instead of using the criminal code enforcement, this is a civil code enforcement. So you can actually go and actually do that work yourself. The court gets control of not only the owners of the property in jurisdiction, but the property itself. I tell people that, you don't bring receiver actions for peeling paint. Typically a condemned structure is a good property to bring a receiver's action, nuisance abatement action in. I consider it an action of last resort. It's not for every property that falls vacant. It's not for every property that doesn't meet the code. It's for the worst of the worst, the properties that you really can't get the owner to the table. You can't get any interested parties to the table. Cleveland Municipal Court has a capious docket, 20-some pages long of people that don't respond to criminal code enforcement. And I'm sure this municipality finds the same thing. And so it really is for those properties, because in the event that no interested party comes forward to take control of the property, that's when the receiver is necessary.
And just for council's benefit, Mr. Yorkovich handed out this flow chart, which really highlights what he was just saying, that the financial condition of the property isn't what is most relevant to the court. It's the public nuisance condition of the property. So you have a hearing on the public nuisance issue. Once the court agrees with you that it's a public nuisance, then a rehab plan is developed, and then you have the appointment of the receiver that occurs after that. So it's really an issue of what kind of condition is the property in.
And I think an important point on that is, if there's any concerns about these actions, those concerns are generally unfounded, because if an owner is willing or able to fix that property up or bring that property back up to code, they're given an opportunity to do that before any of their rights are impaired. So once the court declares the property a nuisance, it orders that party to abate the nuisance. If they fail to do so, then it asks anybody else in the chain of title, any mortgage company, any interest holder, if they have the ability or willingness to fix that property up. And once all of those people refuse or fail, that's when the possibility of a receiver comes in. So, the professor I studied under in law school would correct everybody that this isn't a receivership action, and I still say that sometimes. It's a public nuisance action. It's a nuisance abatement action. And only when, all of the parties available refuse or fail to abate the nuisance does even the potential of a receiver come into play. The other point on the receiver's plan, before the court does appoint a receiver, that receiver has to put a financial and construction plan before the court and before all parties. The court has to then approve that financial and construction plan. So questions like, well, what's this likely property going to sell for at sale if you abate the nuisance? What are the likelihood of recouping any of those costs or expenses? What are the likelihood of proceeds? If the property is likely to market for $100,000 or $150,000, no one's really going to approve $1 million abatement of that property. And likewise, if the owner says, well, don't rehab it, just demo it. The statute provides that any party that advocates for demolition over rehab, full rehab, needs to then expend funds or put funds available for the demo and prove that demolition is the only viable option. So the courts really look to bringing the property back to its beneficial life. I use the term often with banks counsel who would advocate for a very narrow rehab plan. Could we just board it up? Well, abatement under the statute is not merely boarding the property up. It's bringing it back to its beneficial, useful life. So it's typically not cosmetic repairs. It's not carpet and paint. It's new windows. It's new mechanicals. If the wiring is outdated, it's bringing the wiring up to code. It's new HVAC systems, it's not just patching the roof, it's a full tear off and full roof repair. Because what we don't want is the property to go through some expenses, wipe out a bunch of lien holders, and then 2 years later the property's back in the same condition. So we really want to fully rehab the property, make it viable again, make it a benefit to the community. I think those are important aspects.
Oh, yeah. I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Erdl.
Did you say roughly 100 days and $70,000?
Yeah, it was about just over 120 days,
Yeah,
and about $70,000.
it's remarkable to me looking at these photos.
So we're very pleased with, with the performance of the receiver
Yeah.
in this situation. He does hope to bring other actions. He's got another action pending in Cleveland Heights right now as well.
Okay.
And so, we think that, communities like yours that maybe aren't as familiar with these statute, application can become more familiar. With council being present for this case and participating in it, it was nice to have an ally that was concerned about abating a nuisance that wasn't just me. Typically the banks are saying, well, what's the big deal? Maybe we'll sell it to somebody and maybe they'll fix it up down the road. But having a property, quickly and expeditiously and efficiently addressed is really important. These actions are health, safety, welfare actions. So we want to move them along as fast as possible. The longest parts of the case are getting everybody to the table and then the actual rehab process. So we really like to get that property rehabbed and then occupied, because there's nothing better to protect the property from vandalism or theft than having tenants or occupants in it. And so, this property on Silsbee is occupied. We have viable tenants in there. And so, now the next door neighbor who was elderly and had complaints about, the raccoons and the vermin in this property, has tenants that, they can be part of the community with. So I think that's another positive aspect.
Oh, yeah.
With that, there's resources there. Back in 2010 with the law school, we even put together a handbook to support communities in bringing these actions. I've worked with some of your neighboring communities like South Euclid and Shaker Heights, talking about the application of these statutes. And when Shaker went through that process with Cleveland Restoration Society, we worked to support them on that as well. Our goal is that the communities understand the power of the statute, and that they're able to use that as an alternative to just criminal code enforcement.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time today, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yorkovich. All right, the next item on our agenda is Ordinance 2018-30, ordinance enacting and adopting 2018 S-15 supplement to the codified ordinances of the City of University Heights. It's introduced by mayor and council as a whole, but Ms. Thomas, would you care to, do you mind if you speak on this?
This is the annual ordinance we passed disapproving the codified updates that our codified does for us. It's not all the ordinances we pass, it's just the ones that get codified. But this, once we pass this ordinance, he gets the okay to go ahead and complete the work. And then we can start distributing.
Okay, very good. Luke, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just that, council, you may be familiar with the process where American Legal Publishing will provide replacement pages for the book versions of the code that you have, and then they also update the online version so that the codified ordinances are up to date.
All right, are there any questions, discussion? And I would note that we are asking that this be passed on in emergency. Mr. Wiseman.
Oh, yes, I was actually going to make a motion.
Very good.
So I move that we pass ordinance number 2018-30, enacting and adopting the 2018 S-15 supplement to the codified ordinances of the city and declaring an emergency.
Okay, very good. We have a motion by Mr. Wiseman. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by, I'll go with Mr. Rock. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, we will then vote first on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, and the suspension passes. So then on the main motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Very good. The motion carries and the ordinance will be enacted on emergency and in effect upon signature of the mayor. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2018-31 in support of an application for a grant from the Cuyahoga County Community Development Block Grant 2018 Muni Grant Program in support of pedestrian and ADA improvements on South Green Road between Cedar and Silsbee Roads. This is on emergency, and I'd like to give the floor to our Community Development Coordinator, Mr. Grogan Myers.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, you'll recall I introduced this at the last council meeting. This is the grant program that we used to repave Cedar Brooks a couple of years ago. And the grant application is due June 15th, so just about a week and a half away. So the project before you is looking at introducing some streetscape elements in the Cedar Green Business District area. Predominantly, the project would take 4 crosswalks in along South Green between about Silsbee and Cedar Roads and install stamped concrete. And pending the engineer's estimates for the costs, we had also proposed some minor elements, re-roofing of the 2 bus shelters and installing a proposed bench based on the budget. And our goal was to provide some neutral but appealing elements in the district, understanding that we have some rebranding that we're currently undergoing. So we're still working with Joe and his firm to get the cost estimates, but before you tonight is kind of a general framework of what we're looking to propose for the grant application.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Grogan Myers. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Grogan Myers? Or, for that matter, Mr. Cheney, was there anything you wanted to add first?
Just that the grant is $150,000?
That's correct, yes. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Mr. Rock?
So, I think you, Mayor, if we were awarded this grant, do we have to match funds that are awarded to us, or is it?
There is no match required.
There's no match required.
That's correct.
Thank you. Mrs. Weiss?
Thank you. Was this the same type of drawings that, well, not drawings, but ideas that we did not pass about 6 months ago?
So not in terms of the stamped concrete, but the bus shelter and bench, yes.
Right, so the stamped concrete for sure. Okay, so, and also, are these 3 the chosen bus shelters, or are these just ideas?
So the current bus shelter, so that top photograph is the one right in front of the BP on South Green. The 2 below them are the shelters that are at Cedar Taylor.
Oh, they're the actual shelters.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Those are actual shelters.
So we don't
those
know
are-
how proposed ones would look.
Correct. So so those are just retrofitted shelters. So the current shelter would have that kind of ugly white dome removed from the top,
Okay.
and have a gabled glass roof.
Kind of like the bottom ones.
Correct.
Okay, so all 3 would be uniform
Correct.
afterwards. And then just 1 bench in 1 location?
Just 1 bench, and it correlates with where there is public right-of-way space to allow for that at the bus stop.
Okay, and that bench is at Cedar Taylor, or that one's
That
at Cedar
bench-
Green?
That bench is not, that's not a picture from,
Right,
the
I mean the
city.
proposed bench.
oh, I'm sorry, the
What-
proposed bench this is all at Cedar Green.
Everything's at Cedar Green.
Correct. But this is a bench that the city has used previously in the park, and we have a couple other benches sitting in the service garage to be put out later this spring, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one quick comment here.
Sure,
To
Mr. Rock.
piggyback off of Councilman Weiss, when we looked at this a few months ago, I wasn't aware this was a re-roofing effort, and so that probably would have changed my decision. But so I'm glad we can still utilize the existing structure. We're not wasting that. So I appreciate you bring in a little more information this time as to that it is re-roofing, because that does make a difference.
Yes, it at least doubles the cost of the bus shelter if you replace the entire bus shelter as opposed to just re-roofing it, so.
Does anybody have anything further they'd like to ask of Mr. Grogan-Myers?
I just have a moment.
Yes, Mrs. Weiss.
So these updates are $150,000?
So that's what I'm working with Mr. Chuni's firm on, to find what the cost of those crosswalks are. And we're trying to shoot for that $150,000 mark.
We're working on the cost estimate now. It's gonna be close to
Oh, yeah, okay, so the stamped concrete is probably expensive then,
that. Yes.
Yes.
in 4 areas. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Is there any discussion or is there a motion?
Well, Mayor, I'd like to move passage of Resolution 2018-31 in support of an application for a grant from the Community Cdbg 2018 Muni Grant Program in support of pedestrian ADA improvements on South Green Road between Cedar and Silsbee on emergency.
Very good. We have a motion by Mrs. Pardee. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any further discussion? All right. If there is no further discussion, then Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Odom?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And then on the main motion.
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Odom?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Grogan-Myers, and thank you, Mr. Chuni. All right, next item on the agenda is Ordinance 2018-32, enacting codified ordinance section 880 entitled Mobile Retail Food Establishments. This is also being presented on emergency. It is being introduced by Councilwoman Weiss. Councilwoman Weiss, would you like to proceed?
Sure.
May I ask a question first? This wasn't in the packet and it wasn't in other items in the Dropbox that I saw, so
Yeah.
where was this? This particular,
So we just.
no, I remember us talking
Right.
about it, but where's the
I
draft?
did not see it in the,
Dropbox. It must have been my computer, I apologize, because it's scanned all together.
Okay,
yeah, I only have 6 pages.
so we
in
don't
my
have an
packet.
updated copy?
Well, let's see what we got. Well,
That's,
There's nothing in the Dropbox.
well, let's take a moment here.
We have copies for everybody.
I thought maybe we'd have copies here,
No,
that's,
yeah, no, you're right, I didn't look in the.
I'm gonna make some more copies real quick.
Okay.
but I do remember it definitely, so not to interrupt.
All
No,
right.
I thought you were asking on emergency at first.
Okay. I will forward this also. I have it here.
So I can just give a brief overview and then we can quickly look when the mayor emails everything. So the mayor and council had a discussion about allowing mobile food trucks in the city for special city events, and as well as if a resident wanted a food truck for a party, all by permit. This was discussed pretty in depth at the meeting. Councilman Wiseman actually spoke to a food truck owner who lives in University Heights to get some more background, and the individual food truck owners are the ones that have to get the health department permits and have to make sure that their unit is up to par, and they give us the documentation to ensure that, and then we just supply the permit with a nominal fee. So we all thought this would be good for the city, especially it's on emergency because of the summer months. We'd like it to be available for the summer concert series and for, you know, maybe some other events in the summer. And that's the synopsis. And we're all excited and eager to see if this, you know, what kind of momentum we have in the city for ideas, and, you know, maybe just more residents coming into more Cleveland residents, maybe passing through University Heights, seeing what a great city we are.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Mr. McConville, did you want to add anything?
Just that per council's, I think, desire as expressed during the committee meeting, the ordinance is drafted, I think, to be kind of welcoming to food truck owners. It calls for food trucks to file an application, which they would do once a year, but then to seek a permit for each separate time. They would come into the city with the permit fee being set very low at $10, and with the right for the city to waive the permit amount in connection with any city invitation to a city event. So if the city invited a food truck vendor to the park or to the concert series, the city would be able to waive the permit fee as a further inducement for the food truck owners. The regulations were developed from what I thought were the best provisions from a variety of different ordinances that I read. I think that our ordinance is not going to present anything new or unusual for food truck vendors based on what else is out there.
And Councilwoman Weiss, do I recall correctly that this was developed to be similar to what other cities do? So, for example, a permit for every event is pretty consistent.
Yeah, the law director research, I think it was specifically, was it Mayfield Heights?
I think Mayfield Village.
Mayfield Village. It was,
Yes, but looked at some others as well. And I think, you know, I would characterize the maybe the difference between our ordinance and others is that some other places, for example, Cleveland, Akron, designate certain areas and certain days where food trucks will go, and then those vendors pay an annual fee to be able to participate at those places and times that's well in excess of what we think a vendor would ever pay to us. And that's in an attempt to be competitive and, again, to induce the food truck vendors to come to the city because we think, you know, that's something our residents will really enjoy and benefit from.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the work on this, because I would love to see food trucks come in for the concerts, come in for other events, come in for the parade next year. I think it'll be a wonderful asset. So, thank you.
The other clarification I want to make, just so we're all talking about the same thing and I have a full understanding, and this is something the mayor and I talked about, is that the way the ordinance is drafted is it regulates food truck vendors who are going to be on city property or in city right-of-way, but it does not regulate food truck vendors who will be on private property. And that it would allow residents to have a food truck pull up into their driveway without having to pull a permit. Or we're aware that John Carroll, for example, will have food trucks come onto their campus. And again, that would be a private transaction. As long as those food trucks have their certification from the county health board, we're not going to seek to regulate them. But we would have an application requirement, for example, for any food vendor who came to the city park, who decided they wanted to pull a permit and park on Belvoir for a John Carroll football game, who was invited to a block party or other similar city uses.
Yeah, if I can expound on that a little bit. For instance, if one wanted to hire, and I personally attended in another city an event like this, a Swenson's truck for your daughter's bat mitzvah. If it's parked in your driveway here in University Heights, that would not require a permit. But if you wanted to park it on the street in an area that's appropriate for street parking, and you're operating it towards the sidewalk, well, that would require the permit. Okay. Mr. Wiseman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if we pass this, then conceivably somebody could have a food truck this summer in the city, right?
Conceivably. I mean, I know that a lot of food trucks have already made appointments to be certain places this summer, but there are a fair number of food trucks out there, and we are now, potentially an open market for that. So we would be endeavoring to wade into this and see who we can bring in.
And when we discussed the fee, this is more or less a statement, but when we discussed the fee, we were cognizant of the fact that we've never had this before, and that we would want to try at least to the first year to make ourselves attractive as a destination for food trucks, and then see what comes, because we were presented with examples of different types of fee structures that different cities had, but since we don't have it at this point, I think that bears mentioning, because we had a lot of discussion about, will they come? How do we get them here? How will it add to the city? I think I'm glad that we're all doing this, and I've got to thank the law director, because so many times we come up with an idea and we sort of act like we have a magic wand. Give us the statute, and this is the nitty gritty. The law director has to go look at a bunch of different cities and pour through the statutes. It's not the easiest thing to do. I really appreciate your efforts, Luke, and the fact you're able to put this together.
Thanks, my
So
pleasure.
quickly, because we wanted this done actually pretty quickly, and I'm very pleased with the work that Councilwoman Weiss did as well. I have one question about the taxes mentioned.
Sure.
In this is all a new section, right? A new chapter.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And so 880.02 on the first page, B4, proof that the vendor is current and compliant in the payment of taxes. Blah, blah, blah. So this is, if I'm a new food truck person, I've never done this in the city before, I'm assuming there's no proof required to show.
Correct, and so I think what we're really aiming at is, and I saw this over and over again in the ordinances that I looked at from other communities, that the vendors will be required to pay local income tax, and we just are basically reminding them of that initially in the application, and then making sure as time goes on that they have in fact done so. So they'll make a representation to that effect, or if for whatever reason they've fallen behind, they'll give us some evidence that they've worked with Rita to get on a plan to make sure that our city taxes are paid.
Okay, so by the time they come by a second time, we'll say to them, hey, how'd it go the first time? You paid taxes? Something like that.
Right. And when I remarked earlier that I don't think that our application is going to present any new wrinkle to vendors that they don't see elsewhere, this is one of the provisions I was really kind of trying to make sure everyone had comfort about. We're not being stricter or draconian or anything like that in connection with this requirement. This is something that I kept seeing over and over again in other ordinances.
And again, we discussed, I don't know exactly where it is in here, but we discussed the idea that food trucks typically go to the city of Cleveland to get inspected for fire code and health code concerns. That I'm assuming that's in here as well.
Actually, by state statute, they have to get certification from the County Board of Health. And that is part of the application process that we will go through with them, that they'll have to show us that licensure. And in addition, we have a catch-all in there that indicates that vendors are obligated to comply with all federal, state, and local law.
Okay. So, but the point is, we're protected and our residents are protected that these, the food truck operators have both health code concerns taken care of and fire code concerns as well before they come here.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I
Thank you,
ask-
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. May I ask some questions?
Yes,
So
Mrs.
now
Brady.
getting to read this, on page 2, under 880.03, location restrictions, number 2, no vendor shall be permitted to operate a mobile retail food establishment on public property, okay, in the following locations. So number 2 includes a mailbox.
Within 10 feet of.
Within 10 feet of a mailbox. I guess I was thinking this is on public property, so private property, if somebody pulls in a driveway, they're going to be right by a mailbox, but
That's
Is
not,
it relevant
yeah,
to
we're
this?
talking about the big blue.
Okay, then here's the other one, number 5. Within 5 feet of another mobile retail food establishment. When you go to, say, Edgewater on Thursday nights, they are lined up nose to nose to nose. They're within 5 feet of each other, I think. And I would hope that our idea was to have more than one, for example.
5 feet's
It's
pretty
5 feet
small.
too,
Feet is-
it's not very much.
No,
it's me.
no,
You're about 5 feet from Luke right now.
yeah. I mean, the idea is they can't,
Okay, I'm just
they'll have a little space between. Not much.
It's not, that's not very,
Yeah, that's
okay.
not very much.
And
Mr. Wiseman?
I'm listening,
If that's all right.
I'm listening still.
I'm assuming that our building commissioner and fire chief, the inspector has the ability to go look at the mobile food trucks while they're here before they start operating, just to make sure they.
That specific provision isn't in here. I mean, I think they do. We could add something to that effect if you want to make that a particular provision.
I was just sort of just asking if they have the, I would think they have the ability to do that just by them being in the city,
Yeah.
just to make sure that, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything further they'd like to discuss with regard to this motion? Or proposed ordinance, excuse me.
I just wanted to thank the law director for his work on this. I know it was a tight time frame and he did a lot of research. But I'd also like to make the motion if, just have to get back to my, because I was in the, hold on a sec. I just want to say the right thing here. Well, I went to the, make a motion to pass ordinance 2018-32, enacting codified ordinance, chapter 880, entitled Mobile Retail Food Establishments on Emergency.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cameron. Is there any further discussion on this motion?
Still reading,
Excuse me?
still reading,
Oh, okay.
just a
we can wait.
couple more pieces. Okay, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Any further discussion before we vote? Okay, very good. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And then on the main motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Earl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Okay, very good. This ordinance passes, motion passes, and this will be effective upon the signature of the mayor. Thank you very much. Next is a motion to accept bid for the purchase of a four-wheel utility vehicle. Mr. Picorni, would you care to address the city on this matter?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
This is for the purchase of a new refuse collection vehicle, one of the, what we call the scooters that go up the driveway to collect rubbish. Currently, one of our scooters is down and broken with a transmission out. This would be a replacement to that unit. It was also budgeted and funds were available in this year's 401 capital expenditures. So I am recommending that we accept the low bid from Mentor MFG for $14,800 to purchase the next rubbish scooter.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Picorni?
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron?
Sir, did we not just buy one of these?
We are scheduled to buy one of these every year.
I thought we
They last about 6 years, and we have 6 of them, so we're purchasing one a year.
So it's in the budget.
Mhm.
Yes, it was.
It is in the budget.
It's in the budget.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question for Mr. Picorni? Very good. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mrs. Weiss, second by Mr. Ertl. Any discussion on the motion?
Just one more thing.
Okay,
The
Mr.
capital
Rock.
budget, it says 17,000 was budgeted, so we're well within our budget amount.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Is there anything further? If there is not, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Rock?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Erdl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron? Aye. Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries, and thank you, Mr. Picorni. All right, next is a motion to hold an executive session immediately following this regular meeting for the purpose of discussing personnel, legal, and real estate matters. I do not believe we have anything we need to go into executive session for at this time, unless somebody else is aware of something. Very good. Then we will move on to director's reports. First would be finance. Mr. Frederick was excused from this evening's meeting due to his feeling under the weather. Would anybody care to say anything with regard to finance?
Well, I will make a report during the Finance Committee portion of the reports. Thank you.
Okay, very good. And I was also in attendance at that meeting, so chances are if there is anything you didn't cover or anything I would care to add, if you don't mind, I would just simply mention it then and we will move on. Director of Law, Mr. McConville.
Just very briefly, Council, I've had a chance to review the CRA report that Mr. Grogan Myers prepared. It looks to be in very good shape. We'll be submitting it this week to the State Department of Development, and they've indicated that they think they can turn it around to us this week. So we should have our CRA legislation on for reading at the next meeting.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Public safety, we will start with Interim Chief Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'll report on 3 items tonight. One of those items will be reported on collectively with Fire Chief Perko as well. And that'll be reference a service called Lexapol that I previously emailed today to the Safety Committee, as well as the Mayor, that we've previously also discussed. I'll go over that with Chief Perko at the end of my report. First item, again, is referencing the line striping project. We're in week 3 of a 3-week project. As far as I know at this point, everything is going according to plan. We are meeting weekly and communicating with ARL, who's doing the work on a weekly basis. A few locations that have been addressed are in the process of being addressed. Ashurst, just north of Meadowbrook, there will be a double line there. It's faded over the years. It hasn't been restriped in some time. So there will be a double yellow line in the middle of the roadway that will enhance safety at that location, given the grade of the road. Also, the area that's been identified on Saybrook and Traymore, that's being corrected at this point where it's supposed to say stop. Again, constant communication with them. We shouldn't have any issues this year like we've had in the past. Office of Community Policing, second item I'd like to report on. Last week we filled the second position within the office, so now we have Lieutenant James Holden and Patrolman Ben Feltoon, who are occupying the office. Since last week, they've been diligently marketing our entrance notice for our police test. And they're also planning to take part in the Tri-C Law Enforcement Recruiting Fair on June 13th, to also market the entrance test as well. They're actively pursuing community engagement opportunities to include Coffee with a Cop, just as recent as last week. So we are starting the process in terms of having our online platform and announcement. We're still vetting related policy to make sure that everything going forward is done so appropriately and fulfilling the expectation of the organization while interacting with the community online. And that brings me to the Lexapol topic. Chief Perko wants to assist.
Police and fire are working together.
So this is what Lexapol is it's a service that it really is a significant risk management opportunity. You utilize a company that to provide a process that's very labor intensive at a very cost effective rate. And what they do is they look at your policies, they cross-reference them, they extract your procedures, and they create what is a written order manual that is consistent with acknowledged best practices, and also monitors your policy in real time to make sure that they don't conflict with any case law or new court decisions. And they do this in real time. For the resources, or for the cities that have the resources to obtain a service like this, it's really becoming the industry standard for risk management purposes. So I wanted to bring it up today, at least briefly, because we're expecting to get some hard numbers this week in terms of pricing, as well as focusing on the services that they provide that we would actually need. We've been doing this for about 2.5 months now with a representative of Lexipol. So next council meeting, we may have something on the agenda, and we're going to have more communication with the mayor on a direction that will allow us to possibly look into a process like this and a service like this. So, do you want to add anything else?
I think the importance of this is that it's state specific and it's vetted by public safety attorneys. At least on the fire side, it offers us over 150 different policies specific to fire, and that will also incorporate our procedural items. In the fire department specifically, our last major update to policies was over 15 years ago. We should have one concise, clear manual to reference and teach our new folks how to follow procedures, and we have 7 different manuals from all kinds of different dates, formats, and along with all the benefits Chief Rogers mentioned, this would also make ours concise.
Very good. Thank you. I'm sure that there will be, if there aren't questions now, I'm sure there will be before we bring this to the council for a vote. But this does look like a very important program for bringing our city up to date and making sure that we are in legal compliance and making sure that our policies are current as to current law. And I am aware of other cities in the county that do use this service and are better for it, I think. Rocky River comes to mind. I know there are others.
Sure. Chief Stillman is a huge proponent of Lexipol from Rocky River. And to be specific on how often they review your policy, it's twice a year that's scheduled. But if there's a new court decision or something that could impact what you already have in writing, they'll immediately address your policy and update it. So, and with the policy monitoring, they also have monthly training that could be up to an hour for an officer or firefighter, where it ensures that they're using scenario-based training online on online platforms to make sure that the officers, police officers and firefighters are not only aware of the policy, but using them in a practical sense through scenario-based training on a monthly basis. So it really covers a lot of components of risk management.
Along with what the chief said about it being online, that also affords our members of our departments to access them through the vehicle computers too, should they have to reference something while they're out on the road.
Wow.
Very good.
Excellent.
Mrs. Weiss,
I think this is great. I had just a question for the chief of police.
please.
So we have this community policing now. When is like the target date for the policemen to kind of get out, walk the streets, meet the community a little bit?
We're starting that process now, planning events. As of last week, we're starting that. We're currently looking for a sponsor for Coffee with a Cop that we'll do locally.
Okay.
But
What kind of dollars do you need for that sponsor?
I've seen organizations like Cleveland Clinic do it. I don't want to overstep what the officers have already been doing. I know they have feelers out there and they've been networking.
Okay.
It's just once we get it done, we'll provide more information. So,
And then do we have bicycles?
yes.
Okay.
We
Have
have
they
bike
been out
unit.
already?
Yes, they were out in force for the parade. And with the weather
right, I saw
changing
that.
now, they're out more frequently. You'll see them
Okay.
as opposed to early spring when it was still snowing. So.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, sir. I wanted to ask a
question. If it would be possible to consider a review of the policy related to the safety at the end of my street. They've always had a policy that they want to prohibit traffic from entering the driveway, the alleyway for the commercial district. And I think it may
Just for the
be-
record, this is Jackson Boulevard, yes?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay.
And, but the traffic, the police have always had a concern about people jumping the fence and crossing into the traffic and climbing the fence and lowering themselves to the ground backwards. And fearful that there would be someone who would injure themselves in that way.
Sure.
And into the oncoming roadway. Now, to my knowledge, I can't say I've ever heard of anybody falling and getting hit by a truck or a car or bicycle or anything. But we've had a series of incidents now where people are using myself and my neighbors' backyards to cut through various areas, trying to make their way to the store or wherever. So I think it may be time to reconsider the decisions that the force had in terms of the safety. And maybe we could look and see if there's a way that we could open it up for pedestrian traffic to come through in a reasonable spot or manner so that we can avoid.
Just to clarify, the idea or concept of allowing pedestrian traffic through the dead end, which at this time is completely blocked off, is
That's what I'm asking.
that's something definitely to look into further?
And I just wanted to offer my respect and my commendation to Officer York for his time that he spent with me this past weekend. I'm sure he made you aware of some of the events that took place.
I know we've been doing details at that location
Yes.
for multiple issues in the past.
Yes.
So I will pass that along to him.
Yes, I appreciate his advice, his recommendation, and his assistance to me.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cameron. Does anybody have anything further for Chief Rogers? Well, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, Chief Perko.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I just wanted to report that we have our residential lockbox program up and running. Applications can be found on the city webpage or picked up at the fire station. As of today, we actually received 3 applications, so we'll be scheduling to install those sometime this week. I also wanted to report that we'll be working on putting together some kind of formal commendation. I'll be working with members of the fire department as well as police and our joint dispatch center. Overnight at 4 in the morning on Saturday, June 2nd, the fire department received a call for a resident in the city having chest pain due to symptoms they thought was a heart attack. And while we were assembling to respond, dispatch advised us that that person became unconscious, and they then started to instruct the resident's spouse in CPR instruction. The resident was not certified in CPR, but our dispatchers are trained to provide that instruction, which is part of a new training that our new dispatch center provides our dispatchers. They were able to instruct the spouse to give quality CPR until we got there, and ultimately, after receiving advanced care from us and arriving at the hospital, the patient was actually not only alive but talking as we entered the emergency room. So we'll have some more to report on that in the future.
Well done.
That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Chief. Next, the public service, Mr. Picorni.
much to report this evening except recycling. You may have seen this past week in the newspaper, over the weekend they were talking about recycling. Several weeks ago, this council passed our ordinance to continue another year with Kimball. And Kimball was one of the ones we had gone and visited just last week, the mayor and I, to see where our recycling goes and talk to them about the recycling market and some other things that have to do with recycling. As you might have noticed in the article, they were indicating many things are not recyclable or that there is very little market for the recycling, even though it's marked as recyclable. So we wanted to make you aware that that article is out there. There's more information at the Cuyahoga County recycles.org website, and that's the website of the Cuyahoga County Solid Waste District. In our visit with Kimball, we found that they have been finding a shortage in the market with China for mixed paper and cardboard, and that was one of their biggest markets in the past. It also included things like plastics and whatnot. China is now recycling more of their own material, which is cutting us out of the market and leaving us with more recycling at home. So we now need to concentrate a little bit more on cleaning up our recycling stream and making sure that we have in that stream is marketable so that we can keep it going. One of the things they were indicating is that with the market being down, in the past, we have recycled approximately 275 tons of material a year. Last year, we were getting approximately $12 a ton, depending on the type of material, which actually brought us to making only about $3,500 on our recycling. But when you consider it's costing us about $40 a ton to put it in a landfill, we're actually coming out about $14,000 ahead with our recycling efforts. So we're still encouraging everybody to recycle. We're hoping that you take a look at the Cuyahoga County Waste website on what is recyclable and try to keep that stream clean.
Mr. Rook.
I have a question. So I read that article this morning, I was shocked. How many people use blue grocery bags thinking it's a recyclable item? The article clearly says it's
Saving
not.
trees.
Yeah. Is there any benefit to maybe doing the bins and throwing our recyclables into a bin for pickup so we won't have to use those blue plastic bags?
It would increase our cost by a considerable amount. The way we currently collect is you put it in a bag so it's contained so that we can set it out on the tree lawn. So the one buggy that goes up collects the garbage, collects the recycling, sets the recycling on the tree lawn. Once they've cleared the route, we send out a recycling truck just in the afternoon to pick up all the tree lawns.
Oh.
To pick up recycling separately, we would have to either double the number of buggies or we'd have to add the recycling truck to the route at the same time as the rubbish truck is there. We have two routes, so that would be two recycling trucks that would have to be added. So it would change the method in which we do things if you didn't bag it tightly.
If we were to drop off here at City Hall, does it need to be bagged in that instance?
It does not need to be bagged. You can put it right into our blue bins and those are dumped directly into our recycle truck.
Excellent.
Unless they're full.
Then bags do help if they're full.
Yes. Yes, no, for what it's worth, Mr. Picorni and I had a similar discussion, and I think it's something that philosophically we should contemplate. If we have an issue with the fact that we use blue bags and that those blue bags are not recyclable in any conventional way and aren't being recycled, and if we would like to move to a bin system, then it would be incumbent upon us to explore the purchase of a second recycling truck, because we could then dispense with the idea of gathering up the blue bags, selecting a tree lawn where they're placed for a short period of time, and then sending out the truck to pick those up later, which most of us aren't around during the day, so you probably don't realize that's what happens. But for a small period of time, it does. Once in a while, we inadvertently pick the tree lawn of a resident who happens to be home, who's very alarmed by what he just saw. And then we don't use that one again. Right. But all the same, there are many things our city does well with respect to recycling presently, but that's not one of them. So if we want to get away from the blue bags, then we need to commit to purchasing another truck. And that's an expense. But then there's also the overall long-term expense of all those blue bags. So.
And really, education is like the number one thing. I mean, I didn't know you couldn't recycle a pizza box because it has grease on it, and it contaminates the system.
So, and for that, this was eye-opening, and I wanted to ask Mayor, can we put something on the website very prominently that, number one, identifies what's recyclable, provides maybe the link to the county if people want to go there, but also some of this information, about if your pizza box has tomato sauce and grease on it, don't put it in, you'll contaminate the whole thing.
Don't mix it with all the newspaper, because the newspaper can't be recycled.
I think that's really important to know.
You have the best intentions, but you just don't have the best education in this. So I think we need to do a good job in education.
Or you can just finish your pizza.
But it's still on the box.
The grease is in the box.
It's on the box, and
So it's trash.
It's trash.
So what about clear bags? What happened, what is the big deal? Why can't we begin to purchase clear bags?
Well, it's not whether they're clear or they're blue, they're just not processable.
Plastic bags are not processed.
Correct. And in fact, when you
So
take
it
your
doesn't
plastic
matter.
bags to the grocery store, the ones that still accept those, no idea where those actually go. I can't speak as to that, but we can tell you that Kimball does not recycle those.
Yikes.
although they refer to some place that recycles those, is it possible to find out what the possibilities are? Because they did make reference to some, kind of blue plastic bag recycling.
Dave.
Again, if you go to the Cuyahoga County solid waste site, they will show you on that site where you can recycle different items and who will recycle it. I don't know that there is one for plastic bags.
Well, I go back to the pizza boxes. I've had relatives in other states come up and be appalled that we would just put our pizza boxes in, because they knew, and we didn't. And I just want to say, I think if we could put it on the website saying, here are things you didn't know, you think you know about recycling, surprise.
Right.
Something like that, just to get the word out, because you contaminate the whole bundle or whatever is what we learned, so, thank you.
Okay, thank you. When I was going over things I've done in the last 2 weeks, somehow I omitted the very educational field trip to Kimball, and I got to tell you, I was fascinated by what I saw because first of all, there's this big room, the size of a gymnasium or bigger, where all of the stream is coming in, everything's being dumped. If there are bags, they're being torn open and just dumped. And then the bags are being discarded. And then those items are being put onto a conveyor belt, which are going all the way up to the very top level of this very large processing area, which we toured. We wore our hard hats and our safety goggles and went in there. And yeah, it smelled like what you think. But it was all right. And the very first thing you see are these workers along the conveyor belt who are trying to pull off all the things that shouldn't be there. Should not be there. And in some instances, in some communities, like in Cleveland, apparently, it's up to 45% contaminants. People are throwing away things that have no business being in the recycling bin, but these things are flying by. And it's an incredible spectacle to watch people try to pull things out of a conveyor belt flying by, the things that aren't supposed to belong, while they're throwing them into bins, and you see these bins emptying onto a conveyor of actual trash that's going away. And if you don't grab that thing, hopefully the next guy does, and if he doesn't, hopefully the next one does, and if she doesn't, then there's maybe 8 or 10 people in 2 different stations doing this, trying to pull away all the things that don't actually belong there. But after that, then there's a series of things that pull out all the things that do belong there. You have the device that separates out the glass and breaks it into small pieces and sends it away. You have the magnet that takes out all the steel and things that are magnetic and sends it down another chute. You have the eddy current, which I'd never seen one of these, but believe it or not, this force field pops up all the aluminum cans and sends everything that is an aluminum can down one chute, and everything that is just pops up in the air and gets caught by this other chute, and then you see a conveyor belt go away of just aluminum cans.
Wow.
And then there is this other system with air jets that takes out the number 1 and number 2 plastic and separates it from the 3 through 7 plastic. So you see the 1's going away on one conveyor, the 2's going away on another conveyor, and 3 through 7 yet going forward on this larger conveyor. And you have a baler that bales all the different things. Things are being stored. Aluminum cans are being stored. There's piles of glass. There's baled paper and cardboard and fiber. And you can see some of the contaminants. You can see the baled paper, and you can see blue plastic bags sticking out of it, which is, again, a reason why if we just put less blue plastic bags into this, we would see less of them. And the other thing that was particularly interesting and notable to me was if you shred your paper and throw it in your recycling, they can't process it. So what happens is it ends up in with the glass. So you go to the area where all the broken glass falls, and mixed in with all the glass is shredded paper. But the good news is when they process the glass, when they melt that glass down, the paper incinerates with the glass. So it's not a contaminant, it doesn't ruin the glass, but it doesn't get recycled either. Now there are places where you can recycle shredded paper. Now if you bring it here, and if you go to the bin that we have here for cardboard and fiber and paper, and you put your paper shreds in there, it'll get recycled there, right?
Correct.
Correct. But if you put it in your blue bag and put it out back, it won't. It'll get burned up with the glass. Now, who would have known that? And if we could put that, we sent out a postcard earlier this year detailing some of the very things that you've asked about. But it's hard. I will grant that there is so much more impact in seeing it done. And I wish every resident could see what I saw. I know in some respects Kimball views as proprietary how some of the ways its system works. But I would love for our residents to see what actually happens, so that they would have a better idea of what they can put into for processing, what they may want to avoid putting in for processing, and different ways that we can process certain things, so that if you want to be effective, say at recycling the shredded paper, you know where to take it.
I bet there's a YouTube video of processing somewhere.
Well, there may
And we
be.
could probably link to that, and that would show people.
It might, but
It's
it may
an
not
interesting idea.
show what we actually do.
Not ours,
But
but
I
it's
haven't
an
looked.
example.
It may be there. It may be
Yeah,
there.
An example of what we do.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and maybe Kimball has something that they just haven't, that we're just not aware of, but I don't know that they do. I'd love to go back. I'd love to take you all there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
That concludes my
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Earl.
You are subject to seasons, I think is the best way to put it, with the snow removal, leaves, and now you've got the John Carroll move-outs, where they're just dumping their entire contents of their house on the tree lawns. That's a huge project for you.
It is.
How's that going?
It's actually going pretty well, but currently we have about 30 special pickup requests on our list. We've been getting close to 20 done a day, so we will catch up in a week or so.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're actually requesting special pickups. Don't they
Yes,
just
they
dump
are.
and run usually?
Most of them are. Not all.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Mr.
right.
Mayor?
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes, sir. I have a question for you, or I have a request. If you could visit the 2505 Milford Road and assess whether or not the tree needs to be replaced.
2505 Milford. I know 2500 is the corner at Meadowbrook. It's the house next to that? Okay. Is it a tree laundry?
Yep,
Okay.
supposedly dead to the world.
Possible. We have a few out there.
Okay.
I've got one live that the person has requested to get that thing off their tree lawn. Is that, we've talked about that off and on with email.
Which one was this?
It's on Meadowbrook. The woman has a small tree that was put in a couple of years ago and she wants it removed. It's not dead.
Maybe you can trade it for the one at 2505.
It's a
That
strange
is
request.
quite healthy, that tree, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's a strange request, I know, but,
People are strange sometimes.
I'll discuss it with the mayor.
okay.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have a location for that tree?
I'll get it for you.
Okay. all
I
right.
have the address.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll talk then. Okay.
Let me know how that turns out. I gotta deal with
Can
it
do.
myself.
Very good. Anything else for Mr. Picorni? All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Picorni. All right. Next, we have the building commissioner, Mr. McReynolds.
Mayor, good evening, council. In addition to the many residential projects we have going on right now, our major commercial project is at the Belfair community, where they're erecting their annex to the garage. The concrete block walls have been erected and the roof was put on late last week. So that project is on schedule, if not a little bit ahead of schedule. In addition to that, this afternoon, with the cooperation of our prosecutor Mike Astreb and Economic Development Coordinator Patrick Rogan Myers, we obtained a search warrant for the property at 3765 Meadowbrook. This has been a property that's been a source of complaint for many years. It's been abandoned, vacant. The health department has been called in to abate rats. People next door have been long suffering. We're happy to be able to get this warrant, and we're going to serve it Wednesday morning. We're going to enter the house, take a lot of photos, and we may present it to you as a nuisance abatement candidate. Finally, June 20th is the day that we begin our new rental program. The building department will start enforcing that rental ordinance on June 20th. Prior to June 20th, people whose rentals normally would occur during this period between now and June 19th, including June 19th, will be able to renew at the old rate. Beginning June 20th, they will be required to renew under the new rate. We'll be mailing out a letter. Hopefully this will go out and explain everything clearly to both parties that even we would expect if they want to renew under the old rate that we'll get their renewal by June 19th, or at least postmarked by June 19th. But the cutoff date will be June 20th. Anything received after that date will be under the new program. So kind of giving you the heads up. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Mrs. Pardee.
Thank you, Mayor. How many permits for chickens have been pulled so far?
3 totally.
3, okay.
Yes, 3. Ms. Francis, 2 others, can't recall, but they've all complied with all of our requirements.
Okay.
They've shown proof of attending the chicken seminar. And I've personally inspected all of the locations to make sure that they're compliant with the setback requirements.
Great, thank you.
And no complaints so far.
Good. That's very good.
Very good.
Anything else?
Okay. I happened to see from Ruth the draft of the letter that's being sent to the to the landlords whose rentals are renewable on the 19th or earlier, and that appeared to be in order. The trickier one, I believe, is the one we have yet to draft with regard to the 20th and onward, and the new application form. I know Luke's provided some input. I'm going to be providing some input, and we will get that fashioned here in short order and get that out moving forward. We're also going to incorporate into that application some of the other things that have come up that we've added with, for instance, the tax issue. By ordinance earlier this year, this council approved, the city government approved a requirement that you must be current in your property taxes or in a county improved repayment plan. So a specific notation to that effect will be on the new rental application, and that they must affirm accordingly or confirm if they are in a plan, among other things. So we are working at bringing these things forward. And not to get ahead of ourselves here, but we will be posting. So if you're interested, you should look for it for a clerk to be assisting us in the building department as we increase the responsibilities of this department. We've contemplated that we will need additional personnel. We've long had budgeted for a clerk in the department. We haven't had a clerk in some time. That would certainly help out Ruth and Dee with some of the additional administrative requirements that we as a city government have been placing on the department, and we appreciate the diligence and the patience of the personnel there as they adjust not only to the new laws that we're passing, but also to the citizen serve conversion. There's a lot on their plate, and we must all endeavor to be patient with them through that process, as we need for them to be patient with all the changes that we are implementing.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions besides that?
All right. Thank you, Mr. McReynolds. Next is Community Development, Mr. Grogan Myers.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor introduced in his report, we had the rain barrel workshop about a week and a half ago. We had 32 rain barrels ordered, and we actually had one gentleman follow up and order one after the workshop. And we had about 25 people in attendance. A few people got 2 barrels, and a contingent of Girl Scouts showed up as well to learn about rain barrels and rain gardens and whatnot. So it was a very fun time. We had great weather for it as well. We were out in the service yard in the garage, and then, out in the parking lot in front of the service garage. So it was a lot of fun. The mayor and I both walked away with a rain barrel too, so that was good as well. Second part of my report is, as reported earlier, the housing survey was completed as part of the CRA requirements. So we'll look forward to hearing back from the state soon. And then the third piece is now, thank you for your resolution of support for the Cdbg application. That will be my priority over the next week and a half. And hopefully we'll hear back in short order, because the grant period starts July 1st and runs through, we have to complete the project by about the end of November. So we'll be reporting back hopefully very quickly as to the result of that application. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And if I may add, I know that this was brought to you and it seemed as if it was very rushed, but to be clear, it's very rushed everywhere. This program and the announcements were announced only very recently, and in some ways we were anticipating that this would be coming, and Mr. Grogan Myers held a public meeting in advance of the actual announcement in anticipation that an announcement would be had. So we were ahead of the game compared to a lot of other communities in this very tight window to be able to get this going and have an actual project put together that we can submit. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Grogan Myers? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. That brings us to council committees. Building, Mr. Wiseman.
No report.
Civic Information, Mrs. Cameron.
No report.
Finance, Mrs. Purdy.
Thank you, Mayor. We had a meeting to review how things are going in the finance department and look at some potential legislation. This was May 31st, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. The finance director, interim finance director, updated us. As the mayor indicated, there is a part-time person assisting him now with a CPA and a background in taxes, and a part-time consultant who's cleaning things up, reconciling the books. Almost done, will be done hopefully in July with the year 2017. We hope to be back on track soon. The gap conversion should be filed by the end of July. The interim finance director updated us on some bills that were left unpaid from last year that this administration will be handling now. Fixing some errors in payments, pension payments, which I believe must have happened because that was going to happen fairly quickly after we met.
Yes, I believe that I believe that meeting has happened, and to be clear, the errors were in favor of the pension. There were things that were deemed pensionable that weren't really, so we are not in danger. It does not appear that we are in danger of having underfunded a pension as much as we have overpaid.
Okay,
Right.
so we won't be liable for
We
any.
should not be liable for an
That
for an
part's good
underpayment.
news.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Generally, the interim finance director is continuing to work on cleaning up the department. So we are going to be meeting again this month before we recess in July for further updates and to talk about the finance department structure and any additional support the finance department may need. We also heard from the interim fire chief, who has been thinking hard about a ladder truck, working on coming up with ways the city can actually purchase a ladder truck. Some great, exciting leasing options, but the decision was to continue to look at various financing options, but to pursue the ladder truck as we have been, as we also pursue these other financing options. And that is it. Anybody else who was there have anything they want to add? It was an interesting meeting.
Those bills that were left unpaid, did they amount to anything significant?
One was for $300,000.
What are we gonna do about that?
Well, we
Paid
paid it.
Yeah,
Paid
What,
it already.
just a bottomless pay checkbook, or?
Well, it was $300,000 in pavement that was not paid for last year, and we took it out of this year's paving budget, so.
that's one from
But we were aware of that when we had our our streets program, so it's not, so we did not, it's not like we've approved pavement of a street that we can't pave now, because we became aware of that $300,000 unpaid bill before we presented to council the list of the streets we were going to pave this year. So we worked around it on the budget. We're not going to have to move that.
Okay.
Yeah, based on that. But the thing is it's $300,000 that was carried over that was actually spent and just not paid for. So to the extent that there appeared to be whatever you would call a surplus or a carryover balance, it should have been $300,000 less than what it was for that thing. And that's not the only one, but that's certainly one of the more significant ones. Code Red was never paid for last year. That was another $7,000. And until the Code Red collectors started calling my phone every day looking, to get their debt paid, I realized, hey, this was never paid last year. And what made that one particularly tricky was because the previous finance director budgeted based upon actual expenses from last year. Because Code Red wasn't paid for last year, there wasn't a line item to pay for Code Red for this year. So not only was the money not spent last year that wasn't budgeted for this year, so we had to pay for last year, but as I mentioned earlier, we're moving on from Code Red anyway, and we're looking to take on something else, and Code Red was rather expensive for what we got, so yeah. But all the same, we had to pay for it out of this year's budget for last year. There are other examples, but those are two that come immediately to mind.
Right. So again, the Finance Committee is going to meet with the interim finance director again to get an update, even after a month, and to see about what kinds of other support he may need in the structure of his office to make sure things like this don't happen in the future after this cleanup is done. So,
Thank you for your management of all this.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. But thank you too. Okay, next is Governmental Affairs, Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As Patrick and the Law Director just mentioned, our survey for the CRA application was submitted to the state this week, and we are excited to hopefully have an ordinance at the next council meeting, which will potentially say there will be tax abatements on residential construction on current homes. Up to $25,000 would be 10 years, and anything larger than that would be 15 years. So the hope is to keep current residents and attract future residents.
Okay. And just for clarification, I think,
Right, there is a concern that we clarify that tax abatement will apply in scenarios where the assessed value of the home has increased by the dollar amounts that we're specifying. If someone makes a renovation to their home that does not result in any increase in the assessed valuation of their home, they would not be receiving any tax abatement. There would be nothing to abate. It's only in circumstances where some capital improvement is made to the home that results in an increase in the assessed valuation that the homeowner would be eligible to make an application for the tax abatement.
okay.
How often do homes get assessed? I forget. It's not every year.
3 years.
Yeah, I think it's every 3 years.
So we could end up waiting a few years.
Well, if there's a significant addition or something to your home,
Yeah, but you won't know what the amount.
I think
Right,
they do assess
yeah.
it.
So one of the things we're still working
Have
through,
to do all that other stuff right away.
Okay.
yeah, and we're still working through the mechanics. There are certain things that a homeowner might do that we know will result in an increase in assessed valuation. The example the mayor and I talked about was if someone adds a 2-story addition to the back of their home, they're going to end up, and so we want to figure out what the mechanics are for having the county come in and tell us what the increase is, and then the timing of the application for the abatement. There are other things that I would think a homeowner would be hoping the county wouldn't notice. They might put in a certain amount of money to redo a kitchen or to redo some bathrooms, and hope that the county wouldn't bother to reassess the value of their home, because why would anyone want to pay more taxes? So.
I mean, that goes on anyway without the program. So.
Yeah.
Right. And one more caveat is if it does pass the full tax year of 2018, whenever the construction gets completed it would be the whole year of 2018. So if somebody started in 17 but they finished in 18, they would potentially be able to get their, and correct me if I'm wrong, their abatement for 2018 at the completed project.
Right, but the abatement will always apply to the first year following the year in which the application is approved.
Correct.
Right,
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's something.
All right, thank you.
Offers people that
Okay, it's following year. It has to be complete. It's completed when you apply.
Right, correct.
Okay.
And then the following year, you get the abatement.
Correct. The abatement begins.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for the clarifications. Anything further, Mrs. Weiss?
Nope.
Very good. Thank you. Recreation, Mr. Ertl.
No report.
Safety, Mr. Rock.
No report.
Service and Utilities, Mr. Sims is not here. Is there anybody from that committee who would care to report? Okay. That brings us to Committee of the Whole.
No report, Mayor.
All right, very good. Well, time is 8:50. Thank you all very much for being here. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? I'm sorry. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mr. Wright?
Aye.
Mr. Wiseman?
Aye.
Mrs. Pardee?
Aye.
Mr. Ertl?
Aye.
Mrs. Cameron?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
I just did that to make it harder for Mrs. Thomas to record that later. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Thanks for being here.
Okay, so